is outing at UNGA 77. We'll listen to this background report compiled by our correspondent, Abdusalam Jubril.
World leaders, diplomats, technocrats, and civil society groups, among others, gathered in New York, United States, venue for the 77th United Nations General Assembly, also known as UNGA 77. President Muhammadu Buhari was among the top dignitaries at the event, where issues that include the Russia-Ukraine conflict, nuclear non-proliferation, climate change, and the need for multilateral cooperation was deliberated on. The president participated in no fewer than 12 high-level events, including bilateral meetings. Arriving in New York on September 18th, he attended the opening of Transforming Education Summit the following day, where he pledged inclusive digital learning for students in Nigeria. In an emotional farewell, the president addressed the UN General Assembly on the 21st of September, assuring world leaders of leaving lasting legacies and restated commitment to constitutional term. He also maintained that his administration was determined to entrench a process of free, fair, transparent, and credible elections through which Nigerians would elect their leaders.
In Nigeria, not only have we worked to strengthen our democracy, but we have supported it and promoted the rule of law in our sub-region. We have seen the corrosive impact on values when leaders elsewhere seek to change the rules to stay in power. We believe in the sanctity of constitutional term limits, and we have steadfastly adhered to it in Nigeria.
The following day, at a leaders' closed-door meeting on climate change, President Buhari reiterated Nigeria's strong commitment to energy transition plan to address climate change. On Friday, the 23rd, the Nigerian leader inaugurated the Integrated National Financing Framework that seeks to combat illicit financial flows. On Saturday, the president held a town hall meeting with Nigerians living in New York and commended them for the exemplary roles in their different fields of endeavor. International affairs experts have commended the president's outing, noting that Nigeria will benefit in the areas of economy, healthcare, security, foreign direct investments, as well as investment opportunities. Guests on the program will be speaking to these and other takeaways from President Buhari's outing at the 77th edition of the United Nations General Assembly in a moment.
And joining us in the studio to discuss the topic is Femi Adesina. Femi Adesina is the special advisor to the president on media and publicity. So you're welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And with us as well this morning, Dr. Adoyi Matthew Omale, HOD International Relations and Diplomacy, Bayes University. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the program.
Good morning.
And also joining us to this conversation from our Kaduna Network Center, I would like to welcome Professor Yushua Ango. He's a regular on Good Morning Nigeria. He's a professor of finance and entrepreneurship at Kaduna State University, where it's, of course, had at some point been the dean of the School of Postgraduate Studies. Professor Yushua Ango, we're glad to have you with us this morning.
Good morning, Kingsley. It's my pleasure to be here.
All right. We had Femi Adesina while he was still in New York with the president. That was when the president, of course, was still in New York attending UNGA and a series of meetings. I would like us to begin this conversation with Professor Yushua Ango. Professor Yushua Ango, there were a number of very important side engagements, if you may, outside of the chambers of the UN General Assembly. And one of those, of course, had to do with the Investment Partnership Summit between Nigeria and, of course, a number of potential foreign investors. A number of comments have been made about that outing, participation by a broad spectrum of Nigerian big economic players as well as others. Let's take a point from that, and then you ask yourself, is this something that we should celebrate, and therefore how do we ramp up the benefits derivable from such high-profile engagements by Nigerian leaders?
I believe it's something in the right direction. The effort has been there, all along since this government came into power, to promote and make ease of doing business, improve on it. And then to also attract investment, from across the globe. So we have had challenges that came in between, especially global challenges. But nonetheless, I believe this particular outing was very interesting because, like you said, it brought key players in the Nigerian economy. Major actors in the Nigerian economy were there. Major leaders of various governmental agencies and ministries were there. And then, interestingly, also international investors and prominent investors and business leaders were also there. And from what I read, obviously some deals were even closed. What is most important was the fact that we are showing that Nigeria was ready, to accept and to attract investors from across different fields of endeavor. Again, some of the things, especially that were discussed in the various groups, syndicates, were also interesting because we are looking at issues, for example, of agriculture, promoting agriculture in terms of the value chain, and then also in terms of exports, encouraging Nigerians, to key into that. We are also looking at education, how to ease and promote use of modern techniques in education and bring investments in education. And we know that Nigerians globally, all over the world, trying to get one education or another, the interest on health, and related matters. All of these were topical issues and they were interesting issues. And I'm happy, among other things, that there were interest shown, to invest, especially in alternative energy sectors and things like that. So generally speaking, I believe this has been a successful summit. Beyond the speeches at UNGA, I think the sidelines and the various activities that took place were interesting, and I believe they are going to be positive, and they are going to bring positive development to the country.
Okay, thank you indeed for your first statement on this. Dr. Omale, there's no doubt that Nigeria has been participating in various General Assembly activities since 1961. And most times we talk about, Nigeria being a big player in the highest level of diplomatic relations, globally. And many would have thought that by now, we would have gotten to a level where Nigeria can say, look, we have been able to establish a very deep diplomatic relations across the globe in terms of investment, in terms of economy, in terms of all the developmental related activities at the global level, so that we would have benefited to a level where we can stand our feet to say, look, Nigeria has landed in terms of its global relations in business and otherwise. Now, what is your assessment of this latest UNGA 77 that the President just returned from? And from what the Prof had just said, would you align yourself with his thinking that it's a very successful and significant outing?
Yes, thank you very much. Nigeria, as usual, is a country that cannot just be washed away in the international system. Don't forget that we are the largest black nation on earth. And Nigeria, with about 200 million people, over 200 million people, with our diversity, with our vibrant human resources that is all over the world, contributing to global development. Nigeria cannot just be washed away. So Nigeria is a country that is great, and everybody attests to that fact. And with our president outing, if you look at the speech at the floor of the United Nations, since President Muhammadu Buhari came to power in the last 7 years, I have followed all his attendance at the UNGA, even from his predecessors. You see that Nigeria has continuously lead the charge in advocating a lot of things for Africa. If you look at the speech, from the issues of climate change to reforms in the United Nations, to all the issues that he has put on the front burner, to even support to developing countries, including Pakistan and other emerging economies, you will agree with me that Nigeria is playing a very, very crucial role in terms of reaching out to the entire world, in terms of giving leadership to most of the developing nations. Nigeria's voice is very critical because, as I've told you, I gave you a background of why we are great, not just in Africa, but in the entire developing world. You cannot just put us aside. And Nigeria is living up to that billing. With the president's speech at the floor of the United Nations, you could see that there was a thunderous applause. Everybody praised all the issues that he has raised. The issues of insurgency that is ravaging Africa, because it's not just Nigeria. The issues of climate change that he talked about, and the issues of Nigeria's contribution to democracy in Africa. He talked about the Nigerian role in Guinea-Bissau, in Gambia, Nigerian role in Chad. Is trying to stabilize Chad after the death of President Idris Deby. So you can see that our president gave a vivid picture of Nigeria's contribution to the development of the international system, not just Africa. And Nigeria is willing, from the speech, Nigeria is willing to partner with anybody, both corporate bodies and other international players, whether state actors or non-state actors, to see that Africa economy, Nigeria economy develops. Let me say that the essence of using this type of opportunity to mobilize for foreign direct investment, there's no other better place you can do it than on the floor of the United Nations. Because the United Nations is the number one multilateral institution where you have the opportunity to showcase your country, where you have the opportunity to mobilize the international community to support whatever agenda or goals, objectives that you are pursuing within the international system.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Malo. We'll return to you shortly. But let's bring in now Mr. Femi Adesina. Femi, I want to return to one of the sideline activities away from the auditorium of the General Assembly. And this had to do, of course, with the various engagements, one of which the NNPC was a part of. There was a report that the CEO of the NNPC canvassed the support of important global players to regard stolen crude oil from Nigeria as blood oil, which would be the equivalent of blood diamonds, as we saw in Sierra Leone, and blood diamonds also in parts of Liberia, that fueled the civil wars in those countries, and for which persons were held liable. And some persons would argue that this is a push that we had not seen before. We had taken it virtually for granted. Oh, Nigeria's crude oil is stolen. Nigeria cannot account fully for its resources. What was the reception of the audience to that advocacy by the NNPC, saying that Nigeria's stolen crude, wherever it is found, and it can be, because each crude oil has a fingerprint, that it should be regarded as blood as blood oil. What was the reception like, and what is the prognosis going forward?
Thank you. I'd like to start from what the Prof in Kaduna said, that the UN General Assembly is not just about the national statements. It's also, it has a lot to do with the sideline meetings. And one of such meetings was the investment summit. That was where this remark by the group CEO of NNPC came up. I think it's the beginning of a thought that may germinate into a crusade. Like you said, we had Blood Diamond in Liberia and Sierra Leone and all that, and the conscience of the world was awakened to that. And this may be the beginning of that awakening to Nigeria's oil being stolen. The president had mentioned it some years back. You know, he had been oil minister, and he said the international community must also realize that this oil is stolen from Nigeria, because you can recognize it. You can recognize it. So with the group CEO of NNPC taking that to the investment summit, I think is the beginning of what can become a crusade. Because you see tankers come, they leave this oil, they go. Some people buy it, and they know that this is Nigeria's oil, and it didn't come through official channels. So I think this, if pursued, this may be a crusade that would redound to the good of the oil industry in Nigeria.
Okay. Kieran, if you don't mind, Professor Yusuf Ango, I would like you to weigh in also on this, because as Femi Adesina has identified, this may very well be the mustard seed that grows into a giant oak that we all will recognize, that Nigeria has for decades now been bleeding on account of the looting of its crude oil. And there appears to be no conscience out there. I mean, there are traders in crude oil who, of course, are virtually happy, to receive Nigeria's stolen crude off the official clear lights, and then they proceed to pay whatever they want to pay. How far can we possibly go in seeking recognition for Nigeria's stolen crude as blood oil?
Well, this is a major problem, as we all know. We, like you said rightly, we have been bleeding, and clearly there won't be this business, there won't be this stealing if there are no buyers. And I believe the international community is able, and they have the capacity to checkmate this, because, I mean, if there are processes, there are methods, through which you can catch or use technology to catch small thieves, then what more of people who are siphoning oil? So this is a conspiracy of gigantic proportion, because it has the capacity, to weaken the economy, to reduce our ability to grow. And I believe the international community has everything to do to checkmate this. I'm happy to hear, I'm not a technical person in that field, that this oil has its own, nature, that you can clearly know which one is which. And perhaps that is why, when they are trading it, they are talking of Brent, they are talking of this, they are talking of this. And because each one brings, or you can process it into different particular products. Now, we are not happy that I read last month that Nigeria is no longer number one in terms of oil exports. In fact, it's number 3 or so in terms of oil exports in Africa, which is largely because of this. Now, another problem, of course, could be reduction in investment in the sector. But the international community, sincerely, because they are very quick, every time there is something wrong with Nigerians or Nigeria, they like to give us the tag, and give us some coloration and say that Nigeria is this and that in terms of corruption. But corruption this stealing will not have happened if the market is not there out. And the buyers are those who are actually processing, and they have refineries and they can process these things. I think if the international community should support us, there will be an end to this. Except, of course, if it is a conspiracy to weaken us, and to ensure that we do not achieve our potential, which are coming out clearly as this in this particular century. I believe this is Nigeria's time. I hope that if we overcome our problems, Nigeria will move on, especially with the infrastructure that we are putting in place. If we get it right and we are getting whatever is ours come to us, I believe we will become a better nation and a greater nation, and will impact more on our neighbors and more on the continent and more on the global economy. But sincerely, what we need is international support, and at least ensure that we catch and we actually punish those who are sabotaging Nigerian economy in this respect.
Okay, and many Nigerians will also think that we also need to do our homework, in terms of, stopping this, stealing of our oil, because all the operations take place locally, right, before any international person will key into that. So we may return to that to have time, because there are other perspectives to that aspect of the conversation. But now let me go back to Omale once more. As a person with an international relation as a background, in the course of the president's address at the UN this time around, he actually made mention of the need to bring a kind of reform in the UN. And over the years, Nigeria has actually made inroad into clinching a permanent seat, in a reformed United Nations. How did that resonate, among other nations, especially those at the permanent seat at the moment? Because one would have wondered that the current structure of the UN, needs to be reformed to accommodate the modern realities, the way the president put it. What's your thoughts on that?
Yes, you see that the agitation for Africa to be represented at the United Nations Security Council has been on, and Mr. President only amplified it and also tried to still reawaken it on the floor of the United Nations. The Security Council is very powerful if you look at the United Nations system. The Security Council handles issues of global security and intervene in terms of crisis. And for Africa, a very, very important component of the international system, not to be represented at a body like the Security Council, shows that the Security Council does not have a global network as it should be. With Africa going in there, all of us will have a voice. African countries will have a voice. So it's one of the shortcomings that a lot of people have identified. Don't forget that with France, Germany, Britain, and the United States having an alliance in the Security Council, and with Russia and China on the other side, it's only we Africans that are not there. And it is very important that the United Nations reform so that Africa can be represented, so that we can all have a voice when issues that concerns Africa. And don't forget that some of the serious conflict in the last few decades, it has been happening on the African continent. If you take the case of Rwanda, if you take the case of Liberia, Nigeria has to take the initiative, because most of the conflicts in Africa, the Security Council is either they are not ready to intervene, or they will just issue some statements condemning them, but they are not really putting in the type of effort that we as Africans will need. Look at even the internal crisis that is happening in some part, like the Boko Haram issue in Nigeria and some of these issues, which we want international support. It's not coming because Africa is not represented in a body like the Security.
Is it just enough to mention it, or is there any mechanism, by which African nations could forge a common front, to, of course, bring it to the table and face the rest of the international community to get that achieved?
Yes, Africa has been trying. If you look at most of the African leaders that spoke at the United Nations, President Ruto and others, they also emphasized the importance of reforming the UN. It's not just the Security Council. There are other organs of the United Nations, like the Law Commission and others, that Africa are not represented. Even if you look at the International Court of Justice, for example, the permanent members of the Security Council at every point in time have a judge at every material point in time in the International Court of Justice. So because of the lopsidedness of the composition of the United Nations, if it's truly a global body, then the reforms is very, very necessary. And I think Mr. President drawing the attention of the world to that aspect of the UN that needs reform, I think is a very, very good idea. The United Nations has come a long way, and we must commend the United Nations so far. Without the United Nations, the type of wars that we would have witnessed, though the United Nations has not been able to stop the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, but at least to a large extent, the United Nations have been able to resolve a lot of conflict. And like the President said, the issue of nuclear proliferation, if the United Nations have not been in the forefront of disarmament, nuclear proliferations, and many other policies, I wonder what the world would have been today. So the United Nations have done a lot and is still doing a lot. The only thing that we Africans and most people are asking is for inclusiveness. The United Nations will be stronger if it can reform some of its organs and reform some of its institutions to accommodate everybody.
All right, Dr. Malik, thank you very much. But Femi, tell us something. The president's outing at UNGA has variously been described as a valedictory session because by May next year, he will be 8 years in office and he would have completed his second and final term. And he says, of course, he's retiring. And so at the next UNGA, which will be UNGA 78, it will be another Nigerian leader who will be at the United Nations. So I'm just saying, tell us something, because you've accompanied the president to the series of UNGA outings. What were the president's own personal sentiments about this, as it were, being his last outing at that global stage?
Thank you. Let me just add something to what Doctor has said about the structure of the United Nations. If you take all the president's 8 speeches at UNGA, 7 physical, 1 virtual in 2020, one thread that has run through all the 8 speeches is the structure of the United Nations. He has always mentioned it in every speech. When we spoke last Wednesday, it was one of the things you asked me about which network did you allow me to answer. The structure of the United Nations had always come up every year. He will talk about structure of the United Nations. He will talk about climate change. He will talk about proliferation of small arms. He will talk about the Palestinian issue. He will talk about Rohingya and all that. If you see most of his speeches, they always run through. And very significantly, when President Biden spoke, he brought up that issue, the structure of the United Nations. So it shows that when you begin to hammer on the same spot, after some time, there is a reaction. For the President of the United States to have come up to say, yes, the structure needs to be looked at, it shows that Africa then is making some impact in requesting for a restructuring of the United Nations. The President said a body that was formed in 1945, the challenges of that time are different from what we have now. So there has to be a restructuring of that body, and I'm glad that it is catching on. Talking of the president's own sentiments, you see, when we travel like that, on arrival, we hold what we call a planning meeting, in which everything that has been outlined for the president during that trip is discussed. And we agree, because usually there are too many requests, particularly of bilateral meetings. So it's in that kind of meeting that we agree this should be done, this should be done, this may be put aside for now and all that. So the person that introduced that meeting said, Mr. President, this may be your last outing at UNGA. President said, no, it's not this may be, it is my last outing. He said, no, this is not this may be, it is my last outing at UNGA. So he is under no pretense that it was his last outing at UNGA. He's sure of it and he's ready for it. One thing about Mr. President is he is always ready for a lot of things. That is why things really catch him by surprise or set him off focus and all that. Right from 2015, he had known that by 2022, God willing, will be his last UNGA. So he has been ready for it. It was not only at the general statement that he mentioned that it was the last time he will be addressing the body. There was a side meeting on stopping illicit flows in Africa organized by EFCC and Auda Nepad. He also mentioned it there. This is my last outing at UNGA. And when we were leaving on Sunday, and he filled the visitors book at the permanent representative, permanent mission. He also put it there, my last outing. And he congratulated all members of the permanent mission, members of foreign affairs for organizing the summit very well. So he has always been ready and he has said his farewell to the world. There is something by Shakespeare and Julius Caesar. Said, if we meet again, we shall smile. Or if not, why? This parting was well made. I think it's a parting well made by Mr. President.
That's very interesting. Very, very interesting indeed. All right, back to Professor Ango. Prof, one of the takeaways from the president's speech was actually in the area of energy transition plan. He highlighted clean energy goals with a conviction of 250 gigawatts of instilled energy capacity. Now, how sustainable would that be? And should that be a timeline for it? What do you think the president envisaged? Now, there's also the issue of combating illicit financial flows. President Buhari regretted the corrosive effect of the menace. Okay, we've just lost signal. We cannot access Professor Ango at this moment. I hope that our engineers will do something about it so we can, of course, reconnect with him for him to make further contributions to this conversation. And let me bring down the question here in the studio. And Professor Dr. Ango, Dr. Omale, you can also come in here. He raised that very pertinent issue of energy transition plan, and also the issue of combating illicit financial flows in the country. Because of course, if there are no persons who accept these monies that are taken abroad from not just Nigeria but entire Africa, of course, that will not work. So, what's your take on that?
Yes, before I answer your question, I want to say something about Mr. President's commitment to say that this is his last attendance at the United Nations General Assembly. You see, it is not just an ordinary statement. That statement carries a lot of weight, especially with the experience of many African countries, sit-tight regimes. We saw what Yahya Jammeh did in Gambia. So Mr. President used the stage of the United Nations General Assembly to assure the international community of his commitment to successful transition program. After spending 8 years, and you will agree with me, since 1999, Nigeria has had some level of stability in terms of democratic transition. And I think re-emphasizing this on the floor of the United Nations is to assure the international community that Nigerian democracy is enduring and is stabilizing. So I think I like that spirit. I like the spirit, especially using that platform to assure the international community that there will be free, fair, and credible elections in Nigeria. So I think that is very instructive. On the issue of transition, you will agree with me that a lot has not been achieved, especially within the African continent. We are still using our normal energy that we consume, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done, especially in imbibing clean energy sources across Africa. In Nigeria, a lot of people still use firewood and all those things. So the international community need to help countries like Nigeria and other African countries, developing countries, to transit to other energy sources. So I think it was very, very apt for the president to have put also that issue on the front burner, because we really need collaboration. We really need assistance to be able to transit. One of the effects of the greenhouse gases, especially in terms of climate change, is that up to today, we still import Tokumbo fridges, air conditioners, all kinds of things into this country. And these are very important that we need to take proactive action, because you can see climate change is real. Look at the type of flooding. Look at so many things that are happening in the world. So it was good that Mr. President has to raise these issues. Secondly, on the issue of illicit financial flow, one thing I have observed in the last 7 years, a lot have been achieved. Abacha loot coming in, a lot of conviction within the international community. Some people who took money and ran to foreign lands, they've not had it easy. The government have continued to pursue such people, and it is good for our international image if we can continue to follow these illicit funds, trace them, stop people from taking our resources and starting in foreign banks. So Nigeria must not be tired. Just like we are talking about oil bunkering and so illicit financial flow is in different form. Look at the recent seizure by the NDLEA. It's also instructive, because illicit financial flow could be in terms of drugs, it could be in terms of other organized criminal activities. It could also be in terms of plundering the national treasury. So as long as these issues are put on the front burner and the international community is cooperating with Nigeria and other developing countries, I think we'll go a long way in solving this challenge of moving funds out of economy that need all the funds to survive, to develop.
All right, thank you very much. Professor Yusuf Ango, we understand that you are back. All right, so we can see you on the split screen. My colleague Kieran already asked the question. If you heard him, that's fine. But if you didn't, let me rephrase it and then add my own segment to that question. And it's as follows. The president raised the question of climate change and what the world needs to do. Part of the response that the globe is focusing on now is on energy transition and the challenges, of course, that a developing country like Nigeria would face if it were simply to leapfrog from fossil fuel to clean fuels. And then, crucially, at one of the meetings during the investment summit, it was reported that Sun Africa and one or two other investors were willing to invest in solar energy supplies in Nigeria. But I would like you to interrogate this, because for so long now we've been hearing about renewables. And the sources of these renewables are here with us aplenty. Is it wind energy? Is it solar energy? But are we preparing ourselves to receive these investors and say, look, well, this is a green field for investment. Get your money in here, and of course you won't regret your investment. Are we ready for this?
Thank you very much. Well, let me take the first issue, which has to do with or at least from Kieran's question, with illicit financial flows. These are issues which are very much of interest, I believe, to Mr. President. You know, if you remember, when he came into power in 2015, he made a lot of trips, all over the world, trying to get these countries to understand with us and return these illicit funds. I believe so much has been recovered, but my opinion is that these countries, while they are always in front, in condemning us and saying we have not done or are not doing the right thing, they are also sometimes not honest with us, because some of them, their economies are oiled by a lot of these monies that have been stolen from Nigeria and other developing countries. That is probably what is left for them. Any country that has gotten its institutions to work perfectly will have very less of this, going into those developed economies. And they make a lot of noise, showing that they want us to be transparent, to be good, to do this, to do that with our economies. But sincerely, I personally do not believe that they are committed to it in the way they are supposed to. If they are committed, then I believe the story will have been different. That is that. Secondly, on the issue of climate, and alternative energy, yes, there is a lot of opportunities here in Nigeria. We have the wind, like you said, we have the sun, because this is Africa. We are very much by the equator pass through us here, so we have a lot of that. And then in addition to the other things that we are already involved with. So alternative energy is it, and transition is important. And I believe, so, for example, investment that is being made, again by this government, towards utilization of gas, gas resources, will also assist us substantially to transit. And luckily now, maybe perhaps because necessity, they say, is the mother of invention, the war of Ukraine, Russia has made the Western world itself to now demand for for this gas, gas to be pipeline to be constructed so that it reaches them up to Morocco, Algeria. These are initiatives, these are requirements. So for us transiting should be, the only challenge sincerely is that of funds, that of investors. And the investors like Sun Energy that has been mentioned, we look forward to their coming, and we hope that, and I believe that the country is ready, since the various initiatives of trying to encourage investments and improve our MDA's approach to various, approaches towards ease in business operations. This is going on, and there's an agency that is monitoring that, and they are working, and they are at every point actually scoring, and seeing how each agency is doing with regards to that. You will recall also that Mr. President, in the very first presidential order, executive order he gave, had to do with some of these improvements. So that shows that we are actually committed as a country. We are ready. And we only hope that the investors will see this and come in and key in. The potentials are there. We can generate a lot of it. We can even export a lot of this energy across other African countries, even though we do that a little bit now because of certain agreements. But I believe there is room for a lot more. And I believe the country is ready for it. We will be happy, the more of that we have, the better for the country and the better for the international economy as well.
Back to Abuja here. Femi, you have traveled with Mr. President on several occasions and on different platforms. And the fundamental thing is that Nigeria has always been seeking for collaboration with other nations, which of course is other nations do the same. Now, but I'm worried that after all these meetings and, meetings on the sidelines of such platforms where issues concerning investment in Nigeria and all that were discussed, we seem not to be feeling the impact to an extent which one could say, look, that to have been able to achieve our mission after each and every of these sessions we had across the globe. Now, I'm bringing this issue because of the energy transition that Mr. President raised at the UNGA 77. Now, Nigeria has surplus solar power, but to tap it is the issue. But there are also agencies. There are agencies in Nigeria that are championing the responsibility of ensuring that we have solar energy, at least that aspect of energy transition. But do we have the political will to do that? That's one point. Another is this: there are countries that are willing to offer assistance to Nigeria. For instance, Czech Republic just entered into agreement with Nigeria some years ago with respect to technology transfer. And I want to believe, quite frankly, that without technology transfer, without homegrown technology in Nigeria, any investment in the country that we're not going to be participating will not yield any dividend, because the locals will have to key into whatever policy or whatever investment that we're going to have in the country. So how do you look at the mechanics of ensuring that whatever agreement we have reached with any country across the globe can be cascaded down to Nigeria, to the last level of our development, for us to begin to feel the impact of some of these issues, because that is the essence of it all. So, from your experience, what is the possibility of Nigeria really keying into whatever agreement reached with any other country in terms of investment or collaboration in economy or technological advancement?
Thank you. Before I go straight to direct to your question, let me add something to what I said last when Kingsley asked about Mr. President's preparedness to exit after this last hunger speech. And I said, things really faze him. And that reminded me of what happened with the last National Assembly. You know that the leadership of that National Assembly and the executive were not actually too cordial. And Mr. President was preparing to travel. Before he traveled, he had heard that the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House may be decamping. He had a meeting with them, maybe a night before his journey, and, well, tried to say all the necessary things of why government must work together. So he traveled. We were out there when news came from Nigeria, the President of the Senate, Speaker, a number of senators, a number of House of Reps members had decamped. When he was told, he listened. And you know what he said? And so bloody what? Later, I got to know that that's the language in the military. Anytime they hear anything, and so bloody what? That was just his reaction. And he moved on. And we saw that election came, his party still won, there's amity in the National Assembly now, and so on and so forth. Doctor spoke about that bust the NDLEA did. We also had it in New York. You know what he said? He called me Marwa on phone. And immediately he spoke with General Marwa and commended. He said, 2 tons of cocaine? That's a lot. That's a lot. He immediately called up the NDLEA chairman and he commended him for that bust. So that's the kind of person Mr. President is. Now, talking about all those meetings and all those agreements, how they translate into development for our country. I think it was at UNGA last year when one president also came and mentioned an agreement that they had reached earlier and sort of hinted that there was slow movement on that. I recall Mr. President asking the Minister of Foreign Affairs that who was in charge of that matter, which desk was in charge of that matter, that he needed an update on it. So when you have agreements and things like that, it's the job of the technocrats and the bureaucrats to follow up on it. That is why in almost every meeting Mr. President has, there is somebody called a note taker who is there. We media are there just for reportage. There is a note taker who is there for records that technocrats and bureaucrats must follow up on. And if anything, therefore, is agreed and there's no follow-up and eventually does not translate into anything, the problem is that of the bureaucracy. The technocrats are the ones who then didn't do what they should do. So the onus is on our technocrats to ensure that once there are agreements like that, particularly that have implications for our development, like on solar, like on power, like on energy, they must follow through on it.
And if they don't,
there must then be repercussions if they don't. That's the way to do it.
Oh, all right. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We'll take a short break now. When we return from the break, we'll get into the concluding segment of the conversation.
Finally, the hero of Nigeria's democracy has arrived. He shall usher us into a new phase of development, peace, and prosperity. He is the father of the new Nigeria, His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR. Welcome to another season of giving Nigerians hope yet again. We are sure of a great future for both ourselves and generations yet unborn. We look forward to your leading us as a nation to our manifest destiny. Though the challenges against us as a people are many, we know that your leadership shall set us on the right path to our greatness. A new dawn beckons on us all, and having you as our president is a precursor to this. Thank you for believing in Nigeria. This message is from the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA.
Trying our best to contain the situation, and in our operations we've been able to make a lot of recoveries. We've been able to also arrest suspects that are involved in this kind of activities, and we've been able to also recover particularly arms and ammunition from those who are carrying it unlawfully and disturbing the peace of the people. But generally, our morale in the Nigerian police is always guided by our commitment to do what we have sworn to do. Peace and security must be looked into as a priority by all, to look at security as the business of all of us.
This message is from the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Everywhere you go, from banks to hospitals to public offices, mass transit stations, airports, and even telecommunication centers, senior citizens are treated as nuisances. They are not. They are senior members of our society, and they deserve the utmost respect. We shouldn't be having our aged fathers and mothers standing in long queues to withdraw their monies at banks. Our retired senior citizens shouldn't be caught standing in buses for lack of seats or chasing after one just to get to their destination. Senior citizens shouldn't have to sit long hours in hospital corridors with no geriatric specialist to attend to them. Our senior citizens deserve better treatment from all of us. They deserve to be listened to. They are deserving of seat reservations on public buses and priority attendance in public spaces. As young people, we are quick to say, no one owes you. This is not true. We owe the elderly members of our society a helping hand, our services, and respect. Age-friendly societies have more senior citizens enjoying good health, living safely, and engaging in meaningful community work than those who do not. Dignifying age-friendly services for senior citizens.
The counsel of our fathers.
I believe we have fought one civil war too many in this country. So those who experience it will run away from it.
Nigerian youth, let's build our nation together.
You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. All our three guests are still with us. Dr. Malik here in the studios, Femi Additional also here in the studios, and Professor Yushua Ango from our Kaduna Network Center. Professor Yushua Ango, I want to return to the investment summit in New York, at which Nigeria had a great outing according to a number of accounts. But something amongst others that also struck me in the reportage had to do with the surprise that many were said to have expressed, pleasant surprise, when a pension fund manager said that the pension fund he has for management and therefore for investment is to the tune of 1.3 trillion US dollars, which is about 3 times the size of our GDP. That's one pension fund manager. So you have an interaction with such a fund manager, and of course there are many other fund managers in the advanced world, but more particularly in the financial capital of the world, which is in New York. And then you come back to our situation and say, fine, we have a number of challenges, infrastructural challenges, which we are grappling with. We borrowed substantially to try to bridge this gap, but the gap continues to be there. And you're saying, what do we need to do to tap into such available funds for purposes of investment in our domestic economy? Whether it's roads, we have seen, for example, the tax credits that have been offered to domestic companies for the reconstruction of some highways, but a number of the arterial roads still need reconstruction. We still need to expand our railways beyond what we are having now. We still need more investment in power. What is it that we need to get right when we have such investments? And then we are speaking to persons who control the purse strings of investable funds.
We need basically is to create an image. We have to create an image that shows that Nigeria is business friendly, that Nigeria welcomes investments from across the globe, that investors' funds, when invested in Nigeria, will be safe, and that they will have access to their funds and they can repatriate their profits, without much concern. So what we need to do basically is to ensure that we have the requisite, the correct institutions, and we have the framework with these institutions so that they work in tandem with that approach. But it's not a surprise, to tell you sincerely, that there are institutions like that with capacity, for huge funds, investable funds. They are all over. Even in Nigeria, we are creating our own, and they are growing. And that is the right thing. You look at the typical bank in Nigeria, the balance sheet is now in trillions. The balance sheet of major banks in Nigeria is equivalent, it's moving towards a point where probably it will even be more than the national budget of Nigeria, annual budget of Nigeria. That is a private sector-led economy. That's how it should be. That is normal. That is what will be happen. So those investments or those funds are there. They are available. They want to find safe corridors where they can invest these monies, because their monies may be there, but there may not be outlets, actually to invest them. Similarly, we have such, our pension fund administrators, our custodians, our banks. There is huge investment. I look at a bank just yesterday, the audited accounts of a bank, and I realized, for example, like I said, they are in trillions, but what they have in terms of depositors' money was about almost 8 trillion. However, their loans and advances was just 4.something trillion. Now, their total deposit base was about 16 or about trillion. There is a lot of gap. There is a lot of money that could have been injected into the economy. So what we need to do basically is to create the atmosphere, that will enable every investor, every banker, invest their funds, feel safe about it, and all that. So we need to develop the capacity of our businesses. We need to also widen, at least popularize our capabilities. Maybe here, the NTA and other media houses have a lot to do. We should not, as a country, be promoting only our negatives. We are very, I have said it before, that sometimes we tend to be very honest to the extent that we are always promoting our negatives. We are not promoting our positives. What we need to do, we also need to promote our positives. A lot of those developed countries that have made it, they have a lot of bad things in their economy. They are not promoting them. They have a lot of crimes. They are not reporting them. But what we are after sometimes, I'm sorry to say, in our media, and unfortunately now with social media, is to promote the negatives. And if there are negatives, too many negatives, nobody will want to come and invest in an economy. Whereas we have all it takes. We have the population, we have the economy, we have the resources, we have the normal things that ordinarily should attract an investor to come. But when we are promoting negatives all the time, rather than promoting our positives, then these investors are not likely to want to come to invest in our country. Other than that, they don't have much investment opportunities abroad. In their developed countries, the investment opportunities are here in Africa, and especially in Nigeria. But then we need to promote ourselves. We need to package ourselves. We need to tell ourselves that there are some things that are good in us. We shouldn't always be promoting our negatives.
So, Uncle, thank you very much for the points that you have raised. I also just wanted to invite your attention to this point. I probably would need to respond to it. We know that there were a number of obstacles to foreign direct investment that were mentioned in the past. And incrementally, a number of these obstacles have been brought down. If you remember, I mean, you were formerly a banker. In the past, we were talking about Exchange Control Act of 1962 as to how it was an impediment to the repatriation of earnings by investors. That has since been taken care of over the years. Now, investing in infrastructure. Oh, we did say that there was no proper framework to govern investment in infrastructural projects, whether by PPP or otherwise. Nigeria never used to have what today is known as ICRC, which is just a walking distance from us here at the NTA headquarters. ICRC is standing for Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission, which is to say that what foreign investors normally would demand, we already have them in here. That's why I asked again. Yes, you've also raised the issue about negative media reporting in some of the media, by the way. But what more do we need to do apart from country risk? There's a country risk profile everywhere around the world. Let's be realistic. What more do we need to do to draw down on these otherwise available investable funds?
Like you said, it's true. You know, we are working. We're putting the infrastructure in terms of institutions in place, you know, that will ease business generally and attract investors. We're doing that. We are getting a lot of funds annually, you know, coming in. Sometimes it will go up, you know, like in 1999, 2005, you know, we received in excess of $8 billion and all that. But then sometimes it comes down due to perception, due to sometimes, you know, feeling by some investors that will they be safe. So what we need to do, basically, I agree with you that the media is other media, not your media. But what we need to do, those institutions that we have set up, we have to promote them. They have to promote themselves. The Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission should do it. The Infrastructural Concession or whatever commission should promote themselves. They should make themselves available so that people will know what we have done. We have to actually do what has happened now at UNGA. Do more of it. You know, go out. You know, promote. Tell them what it is that is available in terms of structure and the fact that we have been able to achieve stability in terms of repatriation of funds and all that. We also need to put controls in place whereby people, at least that is to improve our institutional capacity, whereby people will not be taking advantage of those things, on those initiatives, you know, to do the otherwise. I know, for example, somebody told me there are people, for example, simply because you could now use your ATM, depending on certain bank services, you can go to another country, withdraw funds, bring them into. I know people have gone into such businesses simply because our structure, the institutional capacity, has not been improved to the extent that will stop all of those things. The more we do that, the more we promote it, the more we tell the world that this is where investment should come, I believe the more they will come. So we need to invite them to Nigeria. We need to go to them. We need to show them what we can do. We need to show them areas. We need to identify those investment areas that they need to come into. The more we do that, the more they will come. And I believe nobody will do it for us. We have to do it ourselves here in Nigeria.
We did have no choice than to do that. Thank you once more, Professor Ango. Now that we're talking about investment and what have you, I think an investor should know where he's going. And some of these, all the countries who have to do business with Nigeria, don't have embassies in Nigeria. They don't have all their, attaches, who also knows around your country to know what is happening. So what if the media is, dishing out negative information? They also have such information. So there's no hiding place for a golden fish.
I'm sorry, Kira, but the point Professor Ango is saying has to do with open sources.
Yeah. Exactly.
The media provide open sources.
Exactly. Now, let me come to this, Dr. Malu. President Buhari also raised the issue of debt suspension and debt cancellation for countries who are facing challenges like Nigeria and other African nations. And I don't know how that resonated among the borrowing nations or the borrower nations, the nations who are borrowing these monies to the developing nations. How would the nations react to that? He requested, he sort of advocated debt cancellation for countries such as Nigeria. Was that a good one? Because some persons were saying that Nigeria is too rich to seek for debt cancellation at this point in time.
Yes, the issue of debt is a very, very crucial issue in the international system. Don't forget that we need, just like we discussed in terms of attracting foreign investment, we need all the resources that are available to be able to meet up with our developmental challenges, especially in developing countries. We need to improve our infrastructure. We need to carry out social investment programs. We need so many things to do with funds, and these funds are scarce. People take loan, or countries take loan, to be able to provide certain services for their citizens. So these loans are not just being taken for the fun of taking them. And when these loans are taken, because of the developmental deficit, it cannot be enough to carry out all the programs. Look at the massive projects that is being spread across the world. Even only the railway sector alone, if it's to come alive, you see the billions of dollars that is needed. Even road construction, bridges, and so on and so forth. So these loans are very important. So no country can develop without seeking funds from other nations, or seeking funds from borrowing institutions like the World Bank and so on. Now, why the president's call is very important is that it is not only Nigeria that is facing this challenge of debt overhang. There is need for developing countries to give us concessions. Mr. President is not even just asking for total cancellation. He is saying that they should give some leverage. They should also give some time instead of using.
I wasn't quite clear. I wasn't quite clear about. But I'm sorry, I'm jumping in, Dr. Mali, because Femi, of course, was there, so he probably will provide more insight. Kiriam, why am I saying it? I wasn't quite clear as to the kind of debt the president was referring to, because we've had the benefit of the presence of the Honorable Minister of Finance in our studios on a number of occasions, where, for instance, he extolled the fact that Nigeria was borrowing very long-term funds at high concessional rates, not just single digits, but rates of below 5%, some cases 1.2, 1. I'm not quite sure of the exact numbers now, but to say high concessionary interest loans from, of course, the World Bank as an example. But we know also that part of what got us into a challenge in the 1980s, and then that lingered on until about 2006 during the Obasanjo regime, Obasanjo administration, when those debts were written off, had to do with private credit. Private credit, the London and Paris Club, these are private lenders. And their rates are usurious because they're almost compound interest. At some point, we were just battling with paying the interest rather than paying the principal. So, and we didn't even know at some point how much we were owing. So, Femi, you may want to provide some clarity on this. Is it on those long-term concessional interest loans, or we've gone back again into the jaws of those private lenders?
I think the president's word was relief, not cancellation. And relief can mean a lot of things. It can mean restructuring. It can mean restructuring, and then those percentages. At another event, the finance minister also said that there was no cause for alarm about Nigeria's borrowing, that Nigeria can borrow up to 40% of its GDP, and that we have not even hit that threshold at all. So all the cries about, oh, we're borrowing too much, may not be quite right if you have all the fundamentals. He said we can do up to 40% of GDP, and we are not there yet. And what the president was asking for was from their relief. And relief can mean so many things.
Okay, you said that the borrowing has not even hit the threshold of 40%.
Yes.
Right, and one would also think Okay, if you have not gotten to that, how productive are you as a nation in the first place? Are you a producing nation and all of that? I don't know how that will balance up, because if you're producing and you're exporting, of course, that is sustainable. Some may think in that direction. Let's bring in Professor Ango once more on this issue of debt cancellation or debt relief or whatever it is, according to Femi. So is it possible, really, or in fact, is it necessary at this point in time for President Buhari to present such at that level, seeking for either a relief or a cancellation, as the case may be, specifically for countries that are facing challenges? I know all countries of the world face challenges, but there are countries that are actually hit so badly with a lot of challenges, namely economy, security, education, and what have you.
We need debt relief. Our level of debt, like we have discussed on this program earlier, in terms of GDP, to debt ratio is very low compared to many countries. We have had countries that have over 100%. We have countries that have 70, 80%. Even in Africa here we have. Ours is, the last I looked, was 20-something%. So that was convenient. That is, we have a lot of room to borrow more. Our problem is the revenue. We don't have enough revenue to service the debt. But we cannot hold on. We cannot say, for example, development of infrastructure should stop until we have money. Because if we do that, then the world will move on. Like Industrial Revolution, they started from 1.0, they are at 4.0 now. If you now don't leapfrog, you will not be able to reach and capture, and lead or go to where you are supposed to be. So we have challenge of revenue. So for that reason, the debt servicing, if you look at it vis-a-vis the ability, the amounts we are able to invest in capital expenditure is a challenge because we have to service our debt. Relief can come in many ways. We can be relieved of the interest rates for some of them. We can be relieved in terms of tenure. We can have some relief. We need the relief, because of the revenue challenges, because of our growth, the level of growth we are at now, and we need to develop. And for us to come out of it, if we have infrastructure, then that is how the economy will work very well, and that is how we'll have the capacity to service our debts. So right now we need the relief just for that reason, but not because we don't have the capacity to borrow. Even if we borrow, there will be challenge of paying back. We have discussed that here on this program earlier.
Yushao Ango, Professor of Finance and former Dean School of Postgraduate Studies, Kaduna State University. As always, great delight having you join us on Good Morning Nigeria today. You were in our Kaduna Network Center. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Right, here with us in the studios also, we'd like to appreciate Dr. Adoyo Omale, Head of Department International Relations and Diplomacy at Base University, also here in the nation's capital. Dr. Male,
thank you.
Thank you for being around.
Here.
All right. Femi Adesina, Special Advisor to the President on Media and Publicity, who is also, I believe, had his last outing at UNGA with the President. I can't be too sure, but he's here. The President has already given his firm word that for him, that was his last UNGA. But Femi Adesina is still a young man. He's still a young man. So, Femi Adesina, thank you for being around on Good Morning Nigeria. All right, let's take some sports stories.